If you like what you're hearing, put your money where your media is by supporting ad-free independent podcasts like this one. Go to lauraflanders.com/membership, and thank you. Hi, I'm Laura Flanders, and this is The Laura Flanders Show, the TV and radio program that seeks to raise radical spirits by interviewing forward-thinking people with real models of shifting power from the few to the many in the worlds of arts, entrepreneurship, and politics. What people know and governments could learn about what saves lives in disasters. This week on the show, grassroots activists share hard-won lessons from Asia, and a solidarity delegation from Detroit springs into action to save family farmers and the ecosystem in Puerto Rico. Then, from food justice and grassroots brilliance, we'll hear about a Puerto Rican plan to recover, revitalize, and resist calls for electricity privatization by building back different. Casa Pueblo has a plan for people-driven solar energy that could inspire islands across the Caribbean. It's all coming up on The Laura Flanders Show, the place where the people who say it can't be done take a back seat to the people who are doing it. Welcome. In the wake of Hurricane Maria, we heard it, as we had heard it after Irma, after Harvey, even after Katrina. You are only as strong as your weakest link. When storms hit, levees break, and waters rise, the links between people and their governments, already weak, largely collapsed in the last season. Without electricity, internet, police, ambulance, what saved lives were the links people had with their neighbors, their friends, their social networks. As grassroots people all around the world know, people are the true first responders in a crisis. So what did community-led organizations do this time around, and what are they doing right now, especially with respect to Puerto Rico? We're going to hear what those groups need from us, you and me, to build back stronger, braver, more resilient, with more people, better prepared and better linked. Trishala Deb is the Asia Regional Director for 1,000 Currents, a grant-making organization with partners across the world. Patri Ramirez is a member of the Puerto Rico-Detroit Solidarity Exchange Delegation, about which we will hear more in a bit. Welcome, both of you. Thanks for coming in. It's really true, and it's so obvious to anybody that works in, disaster preparedness. But at the same time, these are not stories that we hear from our media. So can you fill us in just a little bit? Let's start with you, Patri, on what the people-to-people response has been. Let's just talk about Puerto Rico in this instance.
The people-to-people response has been there from even before the hurricane started. As soon as the people in the island and the diaspora realized that it was going to be hard and it was going to hit directly, there was already networks that were forming. The day of the hurricane, as the hurricane was just still leaving the northern part of the island, there was a call organized by people in the diaspora, a conference call, to start a mutual aid network and support network. So that's the kind of response that we've had, like I said, since day one. And since then, the response at the local level in communities there, as well as here in the U.S. and in other parts of the world where the diaspora also lives, has been going on every day.
So what kind of mutual aid has been going to and fro?
First week concentrated a lot on getting the basic needs and supplies that people need to survive. Once we realized and we hit the roadblock that no matter how much aid and supplied and things, once we realized that a lot of that initial help was getting stuck with bureaucracy and it was out of our hands, a lot of the conversations started shifting and turning, both by the lead of the people on the ground in Puerto Rico as well as the diaspora, to more medium and long-term planning, which is what we are in right now.
Now, you were part of a delegation, Detroit, Puerto Rico, that actually preceded all of this. Give us a little bit of story of that.
The Detroit, Puerto Rico Solidarity Exchange Network was a delegation of Puerto Ricans in the island and Puerto Ricans in the diaspora that went to Detroit this past June to the Allied Media Conference, and we had a whole day where we gathered and we talked about the experiences of those two spaces, in particular Detroit having dealt with similar austerity measures and outside oversight as Puerto Rico that we have with the Fiscal Control Board, to learn from those lessons and to strategize together.
Well, we're going to hear more about what some of those long and medium-term projects are. But this is so much what you're familiar with working in the Asia region, right, Trishala? What do you see where you are?
Yes, we've seen that grassroots partners are the home of the entire spectrum of resiliency, meaning long-term sustainability, recovery, preparation, and the tools that communities need to deal with emerging crisis and the long-term rebuilding that happens.
So give us some examples. I mean, Nepal, you name it. There have been disaster after disaster hitting the Asian subcontinent, and people somehow survive, depending on each other, I guess.
Yes, not only do they survive, but we've seen with some of our partners in Nepal that this can be an opportunity to rebuild an even more resilient infrastructure.
Like what?
So one example we have in Nepal is that we work with two organizations there that have had very strong responses to the rebuilding opportunity. One is a network of 45,000 Nepali women farmers who had formed 42 cooperatives. And in the week after the earthquake, they were able to meet and think by consensus of how they wanted to use their disaster recovery funds and distribute them within less than 10 days.
Wait a minute. How many people decided how to use funds altogether?
Well, it was representatives of 42 cooperatives, so it was roughly 80 people.
And they made a joint decision of how to spend the resources.
Yes, and they distributed every cent in less than 10 days. And they did it by consensus, and they did it because they had long-term relationships, trust, and a process that they had used for community self-determination leading up to that point.
Come back to this, because you're also working on food questions, food justice, and ecosystem resilience. Talk about that part of the relationship, especially between Detroit, with its history of sort of urban farming, and Puerto Rico in the wake of these two hurricanes.
The Solidarity Exchange in Detroit was a place where the farmers from Detroit and the diaspora and the ones that came from Puerto Rico were able to gather and do a lot of thinking together. And that was actually a big aspect of the time that we spent there. We went to a lot of the urban farms and people that had taken land and just started feeding their communities. Even the night before the hurricane hit, there was a meeting here in New York of people in food justice and agricultural aspects that were meeting to create a network of solidarity between New York and Puerto Rico. So that work has been advancing in terms that there's been a fund created, a Fondo de Resiliencia, created by comrades that went to a delegation and people that have added themselves since. And that is basically trying to bring support to the farmers who have lost, if you think about farming, they lost their source of income and they lost their homes. Yeah. So the idea is to bring back agriculture to make sure that when Puerto Rico is rebuilt with food sovereignty. There is an urgent need to send seeds because unlike water, unlike other supplies, crops take time to grow. Yeah. So that has some urgency. And then the other part about the fund that I find that is amazing, and I'm very proud to be in delegation with these comrades, is that they're doing their own canning and their own pickling, which is, the food that is being sent by the government and FEMA, they're just sending food that is not nutritious. Yeah. So the other issue is that there's been a call of solidarity for farmers here. And the idea is that farmers that they can and organizations that work in food justice that they donate fresh food that is harvested near here in New York, which is the city that we're currently working on. And then volunteers are canning it and pickling it and sending it to Puerto Rico. So we're preserving food, but it's natural. We're not putting all the fake stuff, right? So that's an initiative that is coming from the folks involved in the Fondo de Resiliencia and part of the people that went to the Detroit delegation.
Hi, I'm Laura Flanders, and this is the Laura Flanders Show. Thanks for listening. An all-too-apocalyptic chain of disasters has been bearing down on the planet, from wildfires and floods to the most seasonal hurricanes on record, and the first tropical storm ever to hit Ireland. Amidst all this chaos, is there anything to be learned from the ways that grassroots people are responding? Already living on the front lines of disaster, some are finding in the crisis an opportunity to build their own power and their relationships with others and build back differently with an eye on the future. My guests are Patri Ramirez Gonzalez of the Puerto Rico Detroit Solidarity Exchange Network and Trishala Deb, Asia Regional Director for 1,000 Currents, a global grassroots relationship builder.
They got me living on top of my existence. Oh, I reach the edge of my resistance. Oh, mama, they've got me living on the front line. I say, yeah, oh, yeah, woo, 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 yeah, oh, yeah. Oh, what kind of man would I be if I didn't talk about what I see? Me no want me shoot Palestine. Oh, I have land, oh, I have mine. Me no want me shoot Israel. Oh, me so tired of all this hell. Oh, mama, they've got me living on the front line.
That's Living on the Front Line by Keith Thompson and Victor Simonelli, redoing Eddie Grant's classic, released on West Side Records. Become a part of people-powered media by supporting this very show, The Laura Flanders Show, cutting through commercial and social media noise to bring you the stories of people on the front lines making a real difference in shifting power from the few to the many. Become a member for as little as $2 a month. Go on, do it. Go to lauraflanders.com. And while you're there, check out a new report I released just last week, Next System Media, an Urgent Necessity. I bet you can guess what it's about. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, get the heads up on the things we have coming up, of which there are many. Later in the show, labor and community activist David Galarza Santa on the Casa Pueblo plan to make a model in Puerto Rico that could inspire the region. Now back to my guests, Patri Ramirez Gonzalez of the Puerto Rico Detroit Solidarity Exchange Network and Trishala Deb, Asia Regional Director for 1,000 Currents. Find out why this optaholic, me, is ever optimistic as we hear from more of my guests sharing real stories of people faced with disaster, creating new models in recovering and rebuilding, building better for the long haul. So part of the reason I wanted to raise this was not just to give people in our viewing and listening audience another opportunity of another, choice of place to send aid, but to talk about the difference in this kind of response to the kind of response we see when it's top down from government. Can you talk a little bit about big picture, what's the difference and what does it mean to respond this way versus the other way? What would we need to change, in other words, about the way that our governments respond to collaborate with this human-to-human network that clearly can work given half a chance?
Well, I think it's really important to think about farmers and people who practice sustainable agriculture and sustainable development as both the people who preserve and protect the land that we all depend on for our sustenance. So the long-term investment would be for community-based organizations that are building the resiliency of communities that do the stewardship to be able to do that work in the long term. So by that, we want to be supporting foundations and initiatives that give general operating, flexible support over the long term so communities can really build the infrastructure they need to both prepare for these disasters and rebuild with an even greater capacity afterwards.
And is that what USAID tends to do?
Unfortunately, that is not what USAID tends to do. What we see with many multilateral programs is that these disasters become an opening for privatization and for the reduction of community self-determination. So we strongly believe that community self-determination looks like the ability for people to control the development and access of resources in their own communities. So the more local a solution is, the more effective, powerful, and impactful in the long term it will be.
And are these some of the medium and long-term initiatives that you're working on? Talk about the one that has to do with communications, because that's another example of doing things in a different way.
There are initiatives, first of all, to have spaces run with solar panels. There's also initiatives to resource portable network kits so people can actually have their own local internet spots that are run by the community, that are for the use of the community, and they're not benefiting these large telecommunication companies that, when we realize, their towers are down, and we still, to this day, more than, there's a certain percent of people in the island that don't have access to their internet. So
I'm an endless optimist, right? I've been called an optaholic, but I will say that this moment feels different to me. After Katrina happened and the levees broke, there wasn't at that moment, what is it now, 11, 12 years ago, there wasn't the new economy conversation at the level that there is now happening in the United States around the world. 2008 hadn't happened. The financial crisis hadn't happened. Today, are we in a categorically different place with respect to responding, people's responses and our sense of possibility, or is it just that I feel that we could be? Trishala?
Yes, I think we are in a different moment.
Good answer.
And I am seeing responses that are both old and new. Mm-hmm. So an example of an old response is 2 organizations we work with in India that have been diligently training over 1 million farmers in the deserts of Rajasthan how to build the infrastructure to deal with drought prevention, meaning how to really save water in the state that receives 1% of the water in all of India. So these are old, ancient methodologies that are being very carefully given to next generations. On the other hand, in Nepal, we're working with an organization called the Digo Bikas Institute, which really saw earthquake recovery as opening a door for long-term solutions not using fossil fuels. So they really stepped in and also started using micro solar installations in villages that had lost power to reduce the dependency on fossil fuels in the long term. And they're really pursuing this vision of a time when fossil fuels are not used in rural Nepal, and they're starting right now.
Is the reaction different because we have changed the conversation to some extent here in the United States?
I think so. And I definitely, before Puerto Rico was hit by this political disaster, natural political disaster, there has been already about 10 years, more than 10 years of a recession. And people have been migrating for a good number of those years, the height of that migration being the last 3 to 6 years. So there's also more resources and people that have gone through that process, that have been involved and exposed to this new economy project.
Some of which can be old.
Yes, and some of them can be old, but they have been exposed to that. But also, so that's the interesting part. There are people in Puerto Rico that have stayed and still do this, but there's also support when you actually go out and have people that are investing also in bringing back resources since they had to leave, especially because of an economic crisis. So I think it's a combination of both as well.
All right, so lots of possibility in this particular disaster. Thank you both, really. People can find out more about both the organizations represented here and how you can plug in at our website. That was Patri Ramirez Gonzalez of the Puerto Rico-Detroit Solidarity Exchange Network and Trishala Deb, Asia Regional Director for Thousand Currents. You can get more information about all of our guests at lauraflanders.com and support this program by making a donation or becoming a monthly subscriber. My next guest, David Galarza Santa, is a labor and community activist, and he has a plan to recover, revitalize, and resist calls for electricity privatization by building back differently with people-driven solar energy, with a model that could inspire islands across the Caribbean and more. It's called Casa Pueblo. We'll be right back after this musical break featuring Corporate Cannibal by Grace Jones from her album Hurricanes on the Wall of Sound Records. How timely.
Corporate cannibal, digital criminal.
While Puerto Ricans are sweltering in the dark, a big debate is breaking out about how or if to restore the island's battered and under-resourced public electrical grid. The Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority is the biggest public utility in the United States. It's currently bankrupt with $9 billion in debt, they say. Puerto Ricans pay more for electricity than nearly all of their fellow Americans, except perhaps people in Hawaii, and they get most of their power from dirty oil-fired plants that are prone to blackouts, even when there isn't a storm. Capitalists have their sights set on taking the system out of public hands, shifting to a, quote, well-regulated private utility, and making it make money. That's the point of the private part. Is that the only option? Might there be others? And what's next? For answers to these questions and more, I am happy to be joined by David Galarza Santa. He is a labor and community activist right here in the New York area and very involved on these issues. David, welcome to the program. Glad to have you.
Thank you for having me, Laura.
So we've heard it over and over again. This is a humanitarian crisis. The electricity needs to come back on. The next sentence depends on where your interests lie. What do you say about what needs to happen right now with respect to the electrical grid?
Well, what needs to happen right now is to make sure that we don't go back to the Puerto Rico that existed before this storm. We're weathering an economic storm of epic proportions, which is the junta and then this whole promesa bill that was enacted by Congress. Supposedly the people in Puerto Rico owe billions and billions of dollars to these hedge fund vultures and so forth. And so people were already being strapped in terms of their economic situation. Now comes this storm, and it's literally, the perfect storm to try and do the kinds of things that this junta initially was pledged to do, or the promesa bill was pledged to do. There's an item in the promesa bill that says that they can do anything they want to do and fast-track energy projects, for instance, in Puerto Rico without public oversight and the public scrutiny that most public projects would have to undergo. That's very scary to us because, it means the privatization of the grid. It means perhaps restarting this whole debate or this whole fight against these pipelines that they wanted to build in Puerto Rico. It means basically getting stuck to the old way of generating energy in Puerto Rico when Puerto Rico is an island just 100 by 35 miles in the Caribbean where the sun shines nearly every single day and can be powered by sustainable energy. I'm so happy to work with, and I've been working now with for several years, an organization in the middle of the island called Casa Pueblo de Adjuntas. The founder there, Alexis Masol, was a recipient of the Goldman Prize, which is like the Nobel Peace Prize for environmental work. Alexis and the people in Casa Pueblo won that award some 30 years ago because they fought successfully two multinational mining companies that wanted to rip apart that whole area for extract minerals and other resources in Puerto Rico. And they said no, and they organized, and they formed this organization called Casa Pueblo, which is totally sustainable, no government funding, no other kind of funding that would compromise their integrity and their independence. And they remain with us till today, 40 years later, fighting the good fight, and they've taken it upon themselves to make sure that this opportunity right now, for lack of a better word, is used to the best of our ability collectively to get us off the grid and get us off fossil fuels.
So talk about what that plan might look like, because a lot of people talk about it. Can they actually implement it?
It's called Iluminar Puerto Rico. Let's illuminate Puerto Rico with the sun. And so very concretely, they put out a call, they're raising money, and there's tons of people that responded all over the diaspora. But more importantly, our allies in just environmental justice have responded. I mean, I've gotten calls and I've spoken to people all over that want to get involved, whether it be solar generation or solar lights or small solar apparatuses that can power the things that people use when they have upper respiratory diseases, the respirators and things of that matter. And then there are even companies here, for instance, in New York and in Brooklyn that I've been in touch with that can provide all kinds of solar panels to get people to start thinking this way, because we have to rebuild, but we have to resist that temptation or that inclination to go back to the way things were. Right now, Puerto Rico is in a place environmentally that's a disaster.
You're not the only person to notice that there's a relationship between these massive, more powerful than any in U.S. recorded history hurricanes that hit the Caribbean and Puerto Rico in quick succession this fall. It's not impossible that you would find a private interest in the United States that says, actually, we see there's a climate problem. Let's rebuild the grid solar. Would that be okay with you and the people of Casa Pueblo?
They have to consult with the people of Puerto Rico first and foremost. There are many green capitalists, so to speak. For instance, just a couple of years ago in Puerto Rico, some entrepreneur wanted to put wind energy turbines in the southern part of Puerto Rico in an area that was disputed because it was also rich agricultural lands, and people were just like, yeah, we want sustainable energy, but don't you think you should put this someplace else? So they put these windmills up, and guess what? There's no wind. So you got to do it with the right kind of thinking, the right kind of input, and the right kind of support, on the ground, on the grass, on the grassroots level. Casa Pueblo has that. There are people that really have a commitment to conservation and to building Puerto Rico from the ground up. And it's a phenomenal organization, and how come they have that kind of respect and admiration throughout Puerto Rico.
So let's talk about the ground up. I have to say, whenever I hear certainly an American president talk about Puerto Rico's debts, it reminds me of, British colonials talking about the debts that the colonized nations owe to the motherland. What debts? How do you calculate debt in a colonial relationship?
I'm glad you raised that because, colonialism is the number one evil, when we talk about the situation currently in Puerto Rico. Just a few days ago, David Gonzalez, the columnist for the New York Times, interviewed a bunch of veterans from Korea, from the famous 65th Infantry, the Borinqueniers they call them. They've done documentaries on these gentlemen, and they were at a loss to explain. Is like, why is it that we can go halfway around the world and fight, for these freedoms and liberties, and then when our countrymen are saying, why do we have to wait 2 weeks to get food, water, medicine to our people? Why, when we clearly went to the other side of the world to fight for this country? And also, more concretely, these are hedge fund vultures that have been preying on Puerto Rico for years, the same way they preyed on Greece, the same way they preyed on Spain, the same way they preyed on Argentina. These are tantamount to payday loans because a lot of them are just like, high interest loans that are not due maybe for another 30, 40 years at 600% interest rates. And then there's been an ongoing effort to audit this debt because we believe that this is way too shady in terms of like what's owed. And we know there are way too many questions, and half of it is illegal even according to the Constitution.
Let's go back to the question of power. And I don't just mean electrical power. I mean like people power. Because clearly what many saw in this latest disaster was a collapse of governance, of that link between Washington and the people of Puerto Rico. How would you reconstruct that link if it was up to you? And how do you reconstruct an economy where governance and the people are in closer relationship?
And that's the key, going back to Casa Pueblo and its trajectory for the last 40 years. They have like 3 pillars. I believe it's science, community, and the arts and culture. They've also, Casa Pueblo were given they forced the government of Puerto Rico to give them people's control of the vast tracts of forest all around the center of Puerto Rico. And so it's called El Bosque del Pueblo, the people's forest. And they manage that. And they do all kinds of wonderful things with it. They do agriculture. They do they teach the kids from all over Puerto Rico to come in and do botany and do agriculture and do conservation. They do all kinds of scientific experiments there. People even come from actually other parts of the world to study there. In Casa Pueblo itself, they have a science lab, they have a music lab, they have an art gallery, and then very importantly, they have a self-sustained independent radio station that's called Radio Casa Pueblo, and that was operating even throughout the storm and was key to connecting the campesinos and the jibaros all over the island, or in that particular central part of the island, to what was going on. It was key. And we're in the process of trying to, it's a goal to make all of Casa Pueblo self-sustainable and get solar panels to make all the equipment run on solar panels and solar energy.
So we're out of time, but if you had your druthers and this disaster was turned really into opportunity, what would Puerto Rico look like and how would it operate, 10 years from now?
It would be a self-sustainable economy. It would have our mom and pop shops back in our placitas. Right now, we have more Walmarts and Walgreens and box stores per capita in Puerto Rico than any place else. That money comes straight out of Puerto Rico and goes into Bentonville and other places where these companies are based. So they've killed our mom and pops. We need to get back to that, those local economies, those local restaurants, I've placed my faith in a lot of the young folks in Puerto Rico that are doing phenomenal things. I'll mention one other organization that's called Comedores Sociales de Puerto Rico. As we speak, they're feeding hundreds and hundreds of people in Puerto Rico, and they've been doing it for 4 years. So it's not about just feeding people, but also feeding people, and that's how we're going to turn this around and make sure that Puerto Rico is off the grid, off this dependency on the U.S. We shouldn't be getting our food from anywhere else. We can grow it in Puerto Rico. We shouldn't be getting fish from Canada. We're surrounded by an ocean. And so Puerto Rico has got to be really concentrated on self-sustainability, getting off the grid by just letting the sun and the wind and the water power us. And it's so doable.
David Galarza Santa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. That was David Galarza Santa, a labor and community activist, talking about Casa Pueblo and their plan to build a people-driven solar energy project for Puerto Rico. Earlier in the show, Patri Ramirez Gonzalez and Trishala Deb talked about what grassroots groups were doing that corporations and governments were not. You can find out more about our guests and how you can support their work and the recovery efforts in Puerto Rico, as well as empowering your own community in planning ahead in the face of disaster at lauraflanders.com. It's also where you'll find my new piece on the real crisis journalists are facing and what we can do about it right now. Take a moment to support this show. We couldn't do it without you. Become a member for as little as $2 a month. A subscribing supporter makes all the difference. Or make a one-time donation. That helps too. We can't do it without you, only with you. Thanks. I'm Laura. This show is produced by yours truly, with Monica Mohapatra, Natasha Elena Ullman, Jeannie Hopper, Danica D'Souza, Emily Allen, Charlotte Prager, and Diego Romero Montiel. I like to hear what you think, so write to me. That's Laura, L-A-U-R-A, at lauraflanders.com. I do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. The program's made possible by the Novo Foundation and listeners like you. Become a member today. Thanks for your ongoing support. We couldn't do it without you. Stay kind. Stay curious. Till the next time, I'm Laura Flood.